Bunka. My name's Ria Somerville and I've been making this project with the help of a NZ Japan exchange program grant. And today's episode is going to be about the Canterbury Museum, which is based in Christchurch in the South Island of Aotearoa. The Canterbury Museum hosts a wide range of Japanese objects, and one of the galleries that I'm going to be talking about today is the Arts of Asia Gallery on the third floor of Canterbury Museum. I'm from Christchurch and I've actually spent quite a lot of time in these galleries, and although they do have a lot of Japanese antiquity, they also have objects from China and Eastern Asia as well. So as with most museums, a lot of the objects that you'll see in the Canterbury Museum are a result of Western collecting, and this can probably be said of the Asian antiquities as well. So from the 18th century onwards, Eastern art became fascinating to the Western world, which increased the amount of collecting and trade. And when trade increased in the 1850s, Japanese aesthetic and philosophy became more popular in the Western world, which drove an increase in the collection of Japanese art by Europeans. This led into a movement known as Japonism, where Japanese aesthetic and processes were merged with what was happening with the Western Renaissance, and it made Japanese aesthetic even more popular. This is shown in an example such as ukiyo-e, which is Japanese woodblock prints. And when ukiyo-e was growing as a medium, the perspectives, flatness and vibrant colours were so different to what Europeans had ever created. You can see examples of these ukiyo-e, which inspired Western Renaissance and Western art, on a makeshift wall in the centre of the gallery. And this includes some of the well-known prints by artists such as Hokusai and Kunisara. And there's also some furniture on display which has the type of Japanese iconography and styles which were similar to the influences of the English arts and crafts movement. And then the Western world saw artists such as Edouard Manet begin painting with influence from ukiyo-e. And we also saw Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin use Japanese iconography. Similarly, in the UK, arts and crafts architects and craftsmen began to use Japanese aesthetic in their buildings and furniture. The movement of Japonism started to influence what museums were collecting, and we saw large name museums like the Victoria and Albert in London open up their collections to include Japanese art in the 1850s. And some people believe that these trends have faded somewhat, but it's arguable that this interest in Japanese culture shifted gear from the arts of then, ceramics, carvings and paintings, to the parts of Japanese culture that are embraced now, like modern culture, which includes anime, J-pop and Japanese tattoo. One of the major donors of the Japanese art in Canterbury Museum's collection was a man named Sir Joseph Kinsey, and he was born in 1852 in Kent, England. He immigrated to Aotearoa in 1880, and he established a shipping agent and insurance broker in Christchurch. Now, Kinsey was actually knighted in 1917 because he had been the firm that managed revolutionary Antarctic expeditions. The University of Otago's David Bell wrote an essay in which he stated that Kinsey's collection was his contribution to constructing relationships between Japan and New Zealand. And Kinsey's collection is quite vast in the types of objects which he collected, but he had a lot of samurai-related objects, including swords and parts of the samurai attire. He also donated prints and carvings as well. But if you're interested in those samurai-related objects, on the far end of the gallery, there is a display of samurai armour, but also a lot of the objects which Kinsey collected, such as kashira, fuchi, tsuba, and kurigata, which are all elements that are located around the handle of the samurai sword. Kinsey also donated a selection of ukiyo-e prints. And after he died, his daughter May actually assisted the Canterbury Museum, helping to categorise the works which he donated. Now, sometimes when you go to these older style museums, the lighting can be quite dim, and a lot of the times this is to protect the objects that are on display that are quite old themselves. But this gallery isn't the most well lit space. The objects are quite well lit up, but because the lighting in the gallery is not that great, most people don't actually notice the drawers, which are all around the gallery underneath the glass vitrines. And these drawers contain plenty of otherwise unnoticed objects, including the object which I found the most fascinating. So I did my dissertation for my master's on a collection of Japanese ceramics at the Auckland Museum. So I personally have a fascination with Japanese ceramics. And my favourite object in this gallery is a bowl which is contained in one of the drawers underneath the ceramics which are on display. And even though I couldn't find the collection record online, which was quite sad because I wanted to get a little bit more background on this object, the detailing on this bowl was so beautiful. I just fell so in love with it while I was looking at it. So it was Satsuma ware, which is a type of ceramic which is generally a yellow-toned earthenware that's decorated with minute figures, faces, or landscapes. So the bowl I was looking at was just, a normal serving size bowl, but all around it was a scene depicting these figures who looked like they were at a festival, and around all of the tiny black outlines it was inlaid with gold, and it's absolutely stunning. It has the most amazing detail, and I just fear that a lot of people would visit these kinds of galleries and not even notice the drawers underneath. So if you do go and visit this Arts of Asia gallery, definitely open up those drawers and have a look at what's underneath as well. Now, like a magpie, I was drawn to the shiny gold details in these ceramics. And that's because Satsuma ware was actually specifically made to cater towards the Western world as an export product. And it was capitalizing on that mid-19th century Orientalist market. Satsuma ware was originally produced in southern Kyushu, and the original kilns were established in the late 16th century by kidnapped Korean potters, which was kind of common for Japan. And they were originally made as large stoneware pieces with a thick dark glaze, so very different to what Satsuma ware looked like now. And Satsuma ware of that dark, thick style is very uncommonly found now outside of museums and was no longer made after around 1800. Satsuma ware is really key and really embodies that Japonism wave, as they were specifically made to export, and it was designed in a way to appeal the most to the Western world. And it has so much intricacy and detail of complex scenes that are full of Asian iconography that they were considered exotic and oriental for Westerners, which appealed to them for collecting purposes. They began being presented to the West in 1867 and probably reached their height of popularity around 1885. Unlike a lot of other ceramic types, such as rakuhagi or karatsu ware, Satsuma ware was really mainly for display purposes. So you can kind of think of it like the china that came out of England that had willow patterns, the kind of china that you put in a cabinet but you don't ever use. Another feature which I think a lot of people would like are the collection of netsuke. And netsuke are small sculptures, and they originated in 17th century Japan. And they were initially used as a carved button on the cord of an endo box. And endo boxes were used to hold things when you were wearing a kimono because you didn't have any pockets. So people would put their belongings in a little endo box which had a cord tied around it, which would tie onto the belt of the kimono. And the netsuke were the wee buttons that stopped the cord or tightened the cord on the endo. But after the use of kimono lessened, netsuke developed more into miniature sculpture and a way of expressing talent and carving skill. Netsuke are most commonly carved out of wood or ivory, and they sometimes have inlays of decorative elements such as pearl coral or, something like that. And I find that very similar to what we see with the use of pounamu or paua in Māori carving. So the netsuke are on a display on one side of the gallery opposite the ceramics. And in the drawers underneath the netsuke is a collection of Japanese masks, which are really interesting as well. And in Japan, you often see traditional masks being sold at festivals. And this is because they're often worn during ceremonial dances and performances related to religions such as Shinto. And they often depict the faces from myths or ancient dances or from specific Noh theatre plays from Japan. So there are a few different kinds of masks in the museum. There was an Oni mask, and Oni in Japanese means demon. And these are most commonly red, and they show angry and distorted faces. And they're usually used for Setsubun, which is a festival in Japan known as the Bean Throwing Festival. And children throw beans to scare the demon away and bring good fortune to your house. There was also a Hyotoko mask, and these generally have a comical expression where the mouth is rounded and skewed to the side. However, the one in the museum that was on display just had the mouth facing forward. And they're kind of comical and clown-like and remind me of kind of a jester. And the facial expression actually alludes to the myth of Hyotoko blowing fire with a bamboo pipe. And in parts of Japan, he's also thought of as the god of fire. Hyotoko's counterpart is a female mask of Okame, also known as Otafuku. And this is a figure who brings good luck with a white oval face and smiling eyes. And Otafuku often translates to mean much good fortune, whereas Okame means tortoise, which is also a symbol for good fortune in Japan and for long life. The museum also had onna men masks, which were used by men in Noh theatre when they were playing women, because onna means woman and men is the same as mask or face. So the masks used in Noh theatre were quite interesting because the way they were carved were oftenly done so that the direction of light would cast a shadow which changed the expression of the mask. Another mask on display, which I had to do a little bit of research into, was I think a sunbustle mask. And these were used in a performance named Okina, which is often done during a Noh theatre program by the Kyogen kata. So in Noh theatre, the Kyogen kata are the actors who perform in the dialogue-based performances which go between the Noh pieces in a program. Where in Japanese Noh theatre, Noh is quite musical, but Kyogen is more spoken. In Okina, the piece which is part of programs often, has origins which are lost, but it's an ancient performance and the actors have to purify themselves before they perform it. The performance is based in Shinto religion, and there are still strict protocols that are held when people perform it, because the masks in the Okina performance are considered sacred, and performers have to fast from alcohol and abstain from contact with women for a period known as Bekka, or separate fire, before they wear them. So the sunbustle mask is worn by the sunbustle character, and this translates to the third old man, who performs alongside the character Okina, who is the old man, and Senzai, who is the one who is 1,000 years old. They each have a part in the play. Okina prays for long life, peace and prosperity. Senzai prays for general peace and welfare, and Senbaso prays for fertility and rich harvests. Now Okina wears the white mask, and Senzai, as far as I can tell, doesn't wear a mask, but Senbaso wears a black mask like the one in Canterbury Museum. And the Senbaso masks traditionally have a jaw piece that's separate from the rest of the mask, which is connected by string, and this allows it to move. And they also generally have real hair attached on the eyebrows, on the mustache, and on the beard. So Senbaso masks can date as far back as the 8th century, but they're still used in performances today. And I actually found it really difficult to inquire about this online, and I think this is probably because a lot of the names and the sources around Okina is so varied and has changed a lot over time. So I hope that this has given a little bit of background and a little bit of cultural heritage behind some of the objects that you'll see on display in the Canterbury Museum. Now, I did look at going to Otago and going to Te Papa as well, but Te Papa and the museums in Wellington actually don't have much international objects on display. And I contacted Otago Museum to see if they could let me know what was on display, because I'd have to fly quite far to go. And I haven't actually heard back from anyone, so that's got a pin in it at the moment. I am planning on doing an episode on the Auckland Museum's collection because it is quite broad and there's quite a bit of variation, but I will save that for another day. And today's episode I really hoped would just kind of allow people to know where these heritage items are of Japanese history, because some people don't always go through every single gallery the way us museum majors do. So I do find that it's nice to have it pointed out to somebody that, oh, you can go and see some ukiyo-e or some Japanese ceramics here. And the rest of the gallery is really interesting too. I really love the Chinese antiquities, and I know that some of the Chinese objects have a little bit of questionable provenance and how they were collected. But I think that the Japanese objects are really beautiful, and they most likely were collected by purchase rather than by theft or unethical ways of collecting. I think I should probably add as well that a lot of our national museums actually do have a semi-decent online collection. And you can see this at Auckland, Canterbury, Te Papa and Otago. They all have online collections that you can browse, and you can see some of the Japanese objects online. It is not easy to tell whether they're going to be on display. I think only Auckland Museum does that. But you can, browse and have a look at some of the objects that some of our national museums hold, and just see the extent of the cultural collections that they hold behind the scenes as well. I'm a big advocate, as somebody working in the museum industry, for improving these online collections to have more information. So I am hoping, and I know that a lot of the museums are working on it, that their collection records are going to improve, and they're going to have a lot more research done into the objects that they actually hold and into the provenance of how they came into the collection, available for the public to see online. So this was a little bit of a short episode, but I hope you enjoyed the information, and I will see you next time. Bye.